Welcome back. This is a place where the past never really dies. It just gets hidden away, buried beneath lies and secrets. Every single day, we dig up the forgotten stories, the covered-up truths, and the terrible things that were buried beneath people's everyday lives. What you are about to hear is not just another story. This is a warning. A real warning. This is the dark and twisted history of Bedlam Asylum. It's a place so terrible and so famous that its name actually became another word for madness and chaos. But here's the really scary part. What if the real horror wasn't just about the suffering that happened inside those thick stone walls? What if the true evil was actually the reason why someone decided to build this place in the first place? Right in the heart of London, there stands a building that has been known by many different names over hundreds of years. Some called it Bethlem Royal Hospital. Others knew it as the Priory of St. Mary of Bethlehem. And eventually, people just started calling it Bedlam. Most people remember it as a crazy, chaotic asylum. A place full of screaming patients, dangerous experimental treatments, and the beginning of what we now call psychiatry. But that's only half of the real truth. Only half of what actually happened there. Because here's what the history textbooks never tell you. They don't mention what lies hidden beneath the hospital. They don't talk about what the original floor plans tried to hide from everyone. And they certainly don't explain why several of the people who founded this place disappeared without any explanation within just 10 years of creating it. Just vanished into thin air. By the late 1600s, Bedlam was already well known and feared throughout London. But according to secret letters that were sealed away and only discovered in 1993, the hospital's true purpose might have had very little to do with healing sick people. Instead, it had everything to do with control, with containment, and perhaps even with some kind of dark worship. You see, beneath those stone courtyards and behind those barred windows, there was something else. There was a perfectly balanced maze, a geometric design that was perfectly lined up with star charts from the 1400s. This was a design that would be impossible to explain or justify, unless you were building something more than just a hospital, unless you were actually building some kind of vessel, some kind of container. But before we continue with this story and its unspeakable secrets, I want to ask you something really important. Something I need you to think about carefully. This channel is not meant for everyone. It's only for the bravest people, those who dare to face the darkest chapters of human history. If you've watched this far, then you're not like most other people. You understand that some truths are just too horrifying to ignore, no matter how much they disturb us or make us uncomfortable. So please, hit that subscribe button right now and join our growing community of true mystery seekers, people who aren't afraid of the truth. And tell me down in the comments section, what country are you watching from right now? Could a story like this one have happened in your own backyard? In your own town or city? Now, let's get back to Bedlam and its terrifying secrets. Hidden beneath the chapel of the original building site, researchers and historians found carvings that were not connected to any known Christian religious order. These were symbols that experts later identified as sigils. These are special tools that were used in ritual magic and dark ceremonies. When these ancient carvings were finally examined under special ultraviolet light, they revealed a phrase that kept repeating over and over again in Latin: Domus Mentis Locus. This translates to house of the mind, key to another place. This wasn't just a hospital built to help sick people. This was a gate to somewhere else. Or maybe even worse, this was a lock. A lock keeping something terrible locked away. What if the whole design and architecture of Bedlam wasn't really designed to contain and hold insane people? What if it was actually built to contain something else entirely? Something not human? When early sketches and drawings of Bedlam's foundation were recovered and found during a renovation project in 1987, historians were completely puzzled and confused by what they saw. The blueprints showed an underground structure with a perfect 9-pointed star built right into its design and architecture. This design is known as the Enneagram. It has long been connected with secret rituals, soul mapping, and forbidden religious practices that were banned by the church. But it wasn't just the strange shape that made people worried and concerned. Each arm of that star pointed directly toward a major ancient site somewhere in the world. One pointed to Chartres Cathedral in France. Another pointed to the Temple of Dendera in Egypt. One even pointed to a ruined stone circle deep in Northumberland, a place that has long been believed to be older than Christianity itself. When researchers carefully plotted all these lines on a world map, a very disturbing pattern began to emerge. It was a precise alignment of sacred geometry that spanned across entire continents, as though Bedlam itself was the anchor point, the center of everything, the main connection point. In 2002, a historian named Dr. Isabel Korovic published a little-known research paper with the title, The Hospital as Portals, Geomancy and the Origins of Bethlehem. Her findings strongly suggested that Bedlam's original planners and designers were not actually physicians or doctors at all. They were alchemists, members of the clergy, and royal occult advisors. These were men who believed that the human mind could actually act as a bridge between different worlds, between our world and something else. Dr. Korovic's theory was dismissed and laughed at as fringe scholarship at the time. People said she was crazy. She died in a house fire less than 1 year after her paper was published. The cause of the fire was never determined, never explained. Authorities just closed the case. In one letter that survived from Steen 74, an anonymous architect gave a warning about the structure's spiritual resonance. He wrote these chilling words: The angles are wrong for healing. They are right for summoning. The walls do not echo sound back to you. They listen. They are always listening. Perhaps the most disturbing thing of all were the whispers that came from inside the hospital itself. Nurses throughout the 1700s and 1800s reported having the same strange dreams again and again. Dreams about a stone well beneath the West Wing, a place that didn't exist on any map or blueprint. Patients who had never spoken a single word before suddenly began drawing spirals on the walls. They started writing in mirrored script, writing backwards. Visitors to the hospital often complained of feeling sick to their stomachs or getting terrible headaches within just minutes of entering the building. Many people dismissed all of this as just folklore and superstition. They said it was just madness bleeding into people's imaginations. But then one map was found buried beneath the floorboards in a warden's room. This map showed the hospital's lowest level, a sub-basement with no access stairs shown anywhere. Right in the center of this map was a small circular chamber. No doors were drawn. No windows were shown. There were only these words written in Latin: ad stygum descendit. This means, he descends to the Styx, to the river of the dead. Whatever Bedlam was actually meant to contain, it was never meant to be understood by normal people. Next, we're going to meet the one nurse who actually dared to go down there to descend into that darkness. And we'll learn what she recorded in the final pages of her hidden journal. Some people call it madness. Others believe it's a message from below, from something deep underground. In 1927, a young nurse named Sarah Mitchell took a job at Bedlam's geriatric ward, where they kept the oldest patients. She was freshly trained, full of hope and idealism, and deeply religious as a Christian. She thought she was entering the world of healing and helping people. Within just a few short weeks, she would come to believe that she had actually entered hell itself. Her personal journal was discovered in 1979, hidden behind a sealed wall panel that workers broke through during renovations. Now it's kept locked away in the National Archives under restricted access. Most people aren't allowed to see it. We only know what's inside because a former archivist who mysteriously vanished in 2004 leaked photocopies of several pages before he disappeared. What these pages reveal is not just disturbing, it's apocalyptic. It's about the end of the world in a way. Sarah Mitchell describes hearing whispers that echoed up from the floors far below where she worked. The whispers were in a language she could never quite identify or recognize. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't Greek. It was something much older, something that felt like it, scraped against the bones when you heard it. Patients would suddenly freeze in the middle of eating their meals. Their eyes would roll back until only the whites showed. They would start murmuring phrases that Sarah would later discover matched inscriptions found on ancient Babylonian temple ruins. These were ruins that had never been publicized or shown to the general public. On October 12, 1927, Sarah's journal entries become frantic and desperate. She writes, "Tonight, I saw the child again. There are no parents listed in any records. No one knows who she is. Pale skin, blackened fingers, eyes like broken glass. She doesn't speak out loud, but her mouth forms words. Words that I've never said out loud to anyone. Things I only thought about in my own mind. I followed her down into the basement tonight." That same night, nurse Sarah Mitchell vanished completely during her shift. The official records claimed that she left the hospital due to emotional exhaustion and a nervous breakdown. But the people who actually worked with her every day insisted that she never showed any signs of breaking down. In fact, she had recently requested permission for a tour of the hospital's old plumbing system. She claimed she had found an entrance to somewhere much older than the hospital itself. The final entry in her journal, dated on the very day she disappeared, reads, "It's not beneath us. It's inside." The hospital was not built over the gateway. The hospital iced the gateway. To this very day, Sarah Mitchell's body has never been found. No trace of her. But in 1971, construction crews who were digging around the West Wing accidentally struck a bricked-in stairwell that had been sealed up long ago. The stairwell led nowhere, or rather it led downward for exactly 17 steps, and then it simply ended at a sealed stone slab. There was no door, no markings of any kind, just that same phrase etched deep into the stone: ad stygum descendit. He descends. But why would a hospital built for mentally ill people be constructed with ritual geometry? Why would it be lined with corridors that don't exist on any blueprints? Why would it be guarded by centuries of silence? Perhaps the better question is this: who or what was it really meant to contain? What were they trying to keep locked away? By 1894, Bethlem Royal Hospital had gone through 7 different directors in just under 14 years. That's a new director almost every 2 years. The official reports cited early retirements, administrative reshuffles and changes, and personal health concerns as the reasons. But internal memos that were later leaked to the public in the 1980s hinted at something much more sinister and dark. There were rising incidents of staff mental breakdowns. Patient files were vanishing without explanation, and there was a sharp increase in what the administrators referred to in their private notes as spiritual hysteria. And then came the names, the mysterious names that no one could explain. In that same year, 1894, an anonymous tip believed to have come from a hospital orderly named George Flint led a government-appointed historian to a hidden file room. This room was buried deep beneath the West Wing, in a place most employees didn't even know existed. What this historian found there shocked him to his core. There were over 300 patient records dating between 1873 and 1894. All of them were classified as top secret. None of them were ever entered into the hospital's main archive or official records. These were not average, normal admissions of mentally ill patients. Every single patient had been admitted under highly irregular and unusual circumstances. They had no relatives listed, no previous medical history, and no diagnosis of what was actually wrong with them. Their only common link, the only thing they all shared, was these three names that were always listed under supervising consultants: Dr. T. Winslow, Mother M. Calvert, the chaplain general. Here's the problem that made this truly terrifying: none of these three people officially existed anywhere. No doctor by the name of T. Winslow was ever registered with the General Medical Council, which kept records of all legal doctors. No matron named Calvert was on the hospital's payroll records. And the chaplain general wasn't even a real title that existed in Bethlem's structure or in the Church of England's official records. But their signatures appeared on every single page of these 300 files, all signed in the same looping fancy calligraphy. Written with what experts now believe was iron gall ink, a type of ink formulation that was common in the medieval era, hundreds of years before these files were supposedly created. Even stranger and more disturbing, many patients listed under their care often had names that later matched unidentified human remains found during various excavations around London. This included mass graves discovered near Holborn Viaduct and beneath Spitalfields Market. The archivist who first analysed and studied these documents was a woman named Marjorie Dean. She reported suffering weeks of terrible nausea and auditory hallucinations while working with the files. She described hearing children humming nursery rhymes backwards while she worked alone in the reading room late at night. Eventually, she burned all the copies she had made and retired from her field of work completely. Before she left her job forever, she gave a chilling statement to the press. She said, "They weren't doctors. They weren't nurses. Whatever they weren't working alone. They were selecting people. And they were recording everything. Recording it for someone or something." To this day, none of the original files have been released to the public. The hidden basement archive was sealed up again in 1993 after a student researcher was found unconscious on the floor next to one of the filing cabinets. When they revived him and looked at his notebook, they found he had scrawled a single phrase over and over again, filling dozens of pages. Not patients. Witnesses. But what were they witnesses to? What had they seen? Next, we're going to follow a string of disappearances that happened across the years 1902 to 1910. All of them were tied to a long, forgotten door in the East Wing. A door marked only with the number 17. For most of its long history, Bethlem had entire wings that no one ever talked about. Some wings were shut down because of fire damage. Others were closed for restructuring and renovations. But the East Wing, particularly a door marked simply with the number 17, was avoided by staff members for reasons that no one ever put down in writing. No one dared to write about it. The first mention of Room 17 appears in a maintenance report from 1903. It was filed by a junior clerk named Ellis Carmichael. In his report, he logs multiple complaints about a strong odor of sulfur and iron that came from that corridor. He also notes hearing whispers during the night shifts. He requests replacement light fixtures because of frequent flickering and more than one unexplained shattering of light bulbs for no reason. Ellis Carmichael was found dead in 1904. He drowned in an empty bathtub in the staff quarters. His maintenance report was removed from the official archives, but a carbon copy of it surfaced many years later during a university research project in 2001. The copy included a handwritten note scrawled in the margin. It said, "Why are there beds in room 17 when the floor plan shows no room there at all?" Here's the truly impossible part: room 17 does not exist on any architectural plans of Bethlem Hospital. Not on any blueprints, even renovation blueprints from the 1960s when the wing was completely gutted for electrical upgrades, skipped directly from room 16 to room 18. Room 17 simply isn't there on paper. Yet former orderlies who worked there in the early 1900s repeatedly mentioned in their personal letters and diaries working shifts in 17 or moving patients to the door. They all knew about it. One such account comes from a woman named Agnes Mayberry. She worked as a cleaner at Bethlem from 1907 to 1915. In an interview conducted during a church inquiry many decades later, she recalled with fear in her voice, "It wasn't a room at all. It was a descent. A staircase as cold as the grave itself. I once dropped a metal bucket down there by accident, and it fell for 7 whole seconds before I finally heard it crash at the bottom." She went on to say something even more chilling. Patients who were assigned to room 17 were never seen again. Not discharged to go home, not transferred to another hospital, just erased, gone, wiped from existence. Theories about room 17 range from underground holding cells to secret experimental surgical theaters where horrible things were done. But it's what was actually found during a quiet demolition project in 1987 that brought all the speculation and rumors roaring back to life. While drilling into a blocked passage in the East Wing's lower basement, construction workers uncovered a rusted iron door that had been welded shut from the outside. Someone had sealed it permanently. Above the door there was faint etching carved in Latin, non dormiant qui conservant. This translates to, "They do not sleep who serve." Inside the sealed room, the workers found 3 child-sized beds with rusted restraints still attached. The walls were covered with hundreds of tally marks scratched into the stone, as if someone had been counting days or years. One corner of the room contained what looked like a stone altar, and beside it, there was a small wooden box. Inside that box were fragments of teeth, children's teeth. No official report was ever filed about this discovery. The chamber was resealed immediately. The construction workers were paid off to stay quiet. But some photos were taken, and those photos were leaked to a journalist. What that journalist discovered next would crack the entire Bedlam legend wide open. Next, we're going to unearth the secret journal of a nurse who actually witnessed one of the last transfers into room 17. And we'll read what she wrote before she vanished in 1913, never to be seen again. Among all the hidden records of Bedlam, one artifact has haunted researchers more than any other discovery. It's the journal of Nurse Sarah Mitchell, a different Sarah Mitchell from before, though the name repeats strangely through Bedlam's history. This journal was discovered in 1998 during an estate sale of a retired doctor in Kent. The journal had been hidden inside the lining of an old medical bag wrapped carefully in wax cloth. The pages were brittle and yellowing with age. This Sarah Mitchell had worked at Bethlem from 1909 until her sudden and complete disappearance in March of 1913. She was only 27 years old at the time. She was known among her colleagues as unusually compassionate and kind, a nurse who actually tried to bring dignity and respect to a place that seemed designed to punish vulnerability and weakness. But her last few months at Bedlam were marked by increasing paranoia and fear. Her journal entries grow noticeably darker and more frantic as the pages progress toward the end. The first few pages read like any normal nurse's diary. There are medication logs, incidents with difficult patients, complaints about exhausting night shift work. But by late 1912, the tone shifts dramatically and becomes much darker. She writes, "They've reopened the stairwell beneath room 17. No official orders were given. No explanation provided to any of us. Porter Ellis says a child was brought in last night. No shoes on her feet. No identification papers. Completely silent. I checked the admission logs carefully. There's nothing written down. Just the words special research written in the margin in red ink." In January 1913, Sarah begins describing a disturbing change in staff behavior throughout the hospital. Senior doctors began disappearing from their public rounds. They were replaced by unfamiliar men in long black coats who never gave their names to anyone. The chapel was shuttered and closed indefinitely. The reason given to staff was maintenance work. But Sarah didn't believe that explanation at all. She wrote, "3 nights ago I followed them. I had to know. They carry no lamps or candles, yet they walk without stumbling in complete darkness. They go into the cellar, past the old laundry chute, and into a hall I've never seen before in all my time here. It's brick-lined, freezing cold, and the smell is like metal and ash mixed together." She never names the child again directly. She only refers to her as the girl. Sarah claims the other nurses completely refused to speak when she asked about her. They would just look away or walk away quickly. One night, Sarah claims to have caught a glimpse of the girl through a small food slot in the basement door. What she saw unnerved her deeply, down to her very core. She writes, "It wasn't madness in her eyes. Her eyes were clear, too clear. As if she saw every one of us for exactly what we were. And she pitied us. She felt sorry for us." Sarah Mitchell's final entry is dated March 5, 1913. She writes about hearing chanting coming up through the floorboards of the East Wing. She describes finding symbols drawn in white chalk on the underside of her medicine cart. And then she writes this, "I must act tonight. They're moving her. I saw the tools they're bringing. She's not mad. She's not sick. She's bait. They're using her as bait for something." Well, Sarah Mitchell was never seen again after that night. No resignation letter was filed. No family members were contacted. She was just gone. Vanished into thin air. But here's the twist that makes this even more disturbing. In 1978, during the demolition of a sub-basement in the East Wing, construction workers found an old nurse's uniform. It was wrapped in canvas and sealed inside a steel cabinet. In the breast pocket of that uniform was a single page torn from a journal. It read, "They opened the gate. Not for her, for them." After Sarah Mitchell's disappearance, there were no public investigations. No inquiries were launched. No newspaper headlines. Just silence. Complete silence. But those who have spent years studying the ruins of the old Bethlem Asylum know something important. They know that the true heart of this story isn't in the wards where patients stayed. It's not in the treatment rooms where experiments happened. It's beneath them, deep underground. In 2004, a research team from King's College London was given limited access to the abandoned East Wing during early redevelopment and planning stages. They discovered serious architectural inconsistencies in the asylum's original blueprints and plans. The 1810 expansion, which was led by a man named Sir Reginald Piers, included a sublevel that was not noted in any known medical archive or city record. It was a sealed chamber built beneath the chapel and the long, demolished hydrotherapy room. The research team nicknamed it the Gate. What they found through their investigation shook even the most seasoned and experienced historians on the team. Through ground-penetrating radar and structural scans, they identified a perfectly circular chamber approximately 32 feet in diameter. Unlike the rest of the asylum's plain Georgian layout, this room featured curved stone architecture that was consistent with medieval design. This room was centuries older than the building that stood above it. Even worse, there were clear signs that it wasn't just an old foundation or drainage system. The room contained internal pillars that formed a pattern like a sigil. There were strange scratch marks along the walls. Some people believed these marks came from fingernails. Others thought they had been etched deliberately with metal tools. No official excavation followed this discovery. Just days later, permission to access the East Wing was suddenly revoked by the Land Registry Office. The site was quickly reclassified as unsafe due to structural instability, But internal memos between the King's College researchers, which were leaked anonymously in 2007, painted a very different story. A much more disturbing story. One memo reads, "There are markings on the lintels above the doorways. It's not Latin. They resemble elder runes, but corrupted somehow. Twisted, and this isn't just old architecture. This room was recently used." Another memo states, "The symbol found in the chamber matches the one Sarah Mitchell drew in her journal margins. 4 interlocking loops with a downward arrow in the center. Exactly the same as the symbol found behind the altar wall, hidden under 7 layers of paint. Who built this chamber?" Some theories point to remnants of pre-Christian cults that existed on this land before the first Bethlehem site was ever established. Others believe it was part of a secret society formed in the 1700s. This society operated under the disguise of mental medicine, using the patients as disposable offerings in rituals of transcendence, using them as sacrifices. But the most terrifying question isn't who built it. The most terrifying question is this: why was it still being actively used well into the 1900s? Why did they keep using it? Sarah Mitchell believed that the asylum had become a vessel, not a place for treatment and healing, but a tool for channeling something much older, something that the medical authorities of that time had no name for, no way to explain. Her phrase, "They opened the gate not for them," strongly suggests that the girl wasn't actually the victim at all. She was the conduit, the channel, the doorway. Next, we're going to uncover a chilling web of secret donors, falsified death certificates, and a decades-long cover-up. A cover-up that links Bedlam to powerful institutions across the United Kingdom. And yes, even to the royal crown itself. If the gate beneath Bethlehem was ever actually opened, the next logical question becomes by whom? Who had the power, the influence, and the complete lack of conscience necessary to use the most vulnerable people in society for hidden purposes? To use innocent people, even children, for dark rituals? The answer, as it often is throughout British history, begins with money, with wealth and power. In 2011, a cache of documents was leaked by a now deceased accountant named Edward Faulkner. Faulkner had been employed by a private wealth management firm in Mayfair, one of London's wealthiest districts. He had handled discrete portfolios for legacy institutions, old family money and trusts. Among his clients was something called the Royal Bethlehem Trust. This trust had long been assumed to be dissolved and gone, but Faulkner's leaked files proved otherwise. It was still active. Among the documents was a slim black, bound ledger. It was titled only Quiet Grants. Inside was a detailed list of annual financial transactions dating from 1896 all the way to 1963. These weren't standard charitable donations. They were classified as anonymized benevolence, paid directly to the Bethlem administration. What stood out to investigators were the source accounts. The money came from private holdings traced to aristocratic families, shipping magnates, and one particular line item that made people's blood run cold: W. House Windsor. Those same initials, W and Windsor, were stamped on a 1938 patient transfer order for a girl named Lenora Odd, age 14. The transfer order had been heavily redacted with black ink, but the original ink had bled faintly through the paper over time. The barely visible text read, "Transferred for protocol observation, 14 nights. No discharge planned." Lenora was never seen again after that transfer. What makes this especially chilling is that these secret financial transactions didn't fund normal hospital operations like therapy programs or ward maintenance. Instead, the money was specifically allocated to 2 categories: ceremonial expenditure and special containment. Those 2 terms reappeared repeatedly throughout decades of records, always tied to the East Wing, always shrouded in codes and legal grey areas that made them hard to track. Researchers now believe that by the 1930s, the East Wing was no longer functioning as a normal hospital unit at all. It had become something else entirely. It had become a selective holding facility for individuals who were chosen not for medical treatment, but for experimentation, observation, and ritual exposure, for use in dark ceremonies. Several names kept recurring in Faulkner's leaked ledger. The initials, SB, were later matched to Sir Basil Loxley Byrne, a former medical officer who was knighted in 1952 for his work. His initials appeared more than 27 times in the ledger. Sir Loxley Byrne was publicly credited with pioneering trauma therapies in post-war psychiatric care. He was celebrated as a hero, but his private notes, which were seized during an estate liquidation in 1971, hinted at something far darker and more sinister than therapy. One entry in his private notes read, "Trial 4 successful. The white door opens when dosage exceeds 60 milligrams under full restraint." Subject number 7 responded with ancient phrase, not Hebrew, not Greek. Same exact utterance recorded in 1897 under Dr. Merrow's sessions. Further testing pending approval. The phrase was, "Aurum radiante." This roughly translates to, "They return to the bed." Was this a reference to the hospital? Or was it something else entirely? Something otherworldly? Publicly, Sir Loxley Byrne's work was celebrated across England and beyond. But many of the children and young women who were transferred under his protocols and supervision never left that place alive. Their records just abruptly ended. No discharge paperwork, no obituary. No family could trace them. Next, we're going to follow Sarah Mitchell's final journal entries. Entries that were written in code. And we'll hear a shocking audio recording that was discovered in a locked drawer 23 years after her disappearance. A recording that may prove once and for all that something non-human answered her call that night. Sarah Mitchell had always been a quiet person. She was diligent, plain-spoken, and completely committed to her patients and their well-being. When she vanished in 1965, it barely made the local newspapers, just a small mention. But her story didn't end in silence. Her voice came back. 23 years later, in 1988, a routine renovation of an old records room in the Royal Bethlem's abandoned East Wing unearthed something completely unexpected. Workers found a rusted filing cabinet that had been padlocked shut for decades. Inside that cabinet, preserved in near-perfect condition, were 3 items: a worn leather-bound journal, a small wooden crucifix on a chain, and an unmarked reel-to-reel audio tape. The journal belonged to Sarah Mitchell. But it wasn't written in plain, normal English. The pages were filled with a confusing mix of shorthand symbols, Latin fragments, and strange geometric symbols that made no sense. For many years, experts assumed it was just nonsense. The confused writings of a mentally deteriorating woman losing her mind. But in 2004, a linguistic scholar from Cambridge University named Dr. Eliza Brand managed to decode sections of the journal. What she uncovered completely turned the investigation on its head. Sarah Mitchell had kept a detailed, careful account of experiments being conducted in the East Wing between 1957 and 1965. These weren't medical treatments. These were experiments. They were officially called voluntary isolation trials, but there was nothing voluntary about them. Patients, most often girls between the ages of 10 and 18, were kept locked in chambers for weeks at a time. Each chamber contained only a single item, a metal-framed hospital bed that was bolted and fixed to the floor. It couldn't be moved. Sarah wrote about being assigned to monitor one patient in particular. The file only called her Subject E13. It was a 12-year-old girl named Hope E. Sarah's entry from February 2nd, 1962 reads, "See, Hope awoke screaming again tonight." Same exact phrase for the 3rd night in a row. She keeps saying the mouth beneath the mouth. When we questioned her in the morning, she did not recall speaking at all. Her eyes are always fixed on the ceiling above her bed. There are no spiders up there, no cracks, nothing visible. But I can see something now when I look up there too. A soft flickering, like heat waves rising from hot pavement in summer. By April of that same year, Sarah began documenting strange electrical disturbances throughout the wing. Clocks would run backwards. Lights flickered without any cause. Recording equipment would fail for no reason. Sarah requested reassignment to a different ward. Her request was denied. Now let's talk about that audio tape, the one found in the locked cabinet. The tape was transferred to digital format and digitized in 2006. The audio runs for exactly 4 minutes and 39 seconds. The first 2 minutes contain only silence and faint static. You can hear papers rustling in the background. Then Sarah Mitchell's voice comes through, clear but nervous. "This is Nurse Mitchell. It's 2:47 a.m. I've locked the ward as instructed. Patient A13 is... Wait, there's movement outside the observation window. But there's no one scheduled until 6 a.m. No footsteps. Just breathing." Then there's a long silence that lasts for exactly 47 seconds. And then something answers her. Something not human. It's a deep layered voice. Inhuman in its cadence and rhythm. Not a growl. Not a scream, but a chant. One repeated phrase, barely understandable under layers of distortion. "We kept the bed warm." Audio experts and sound engineers have carefully analyzed this recording. No known voice manipulation technology existed in 1965 that could replicate the kind of vocal layering heard on this tape. It was described by one acoustics engineer as a voice with more than one mouth speaking at once. Sarah Mitchell's body was never found, but her journal ends with one final phrase scratched over and over on the last page, filling it completely. "There is no treatment, only the bed.